My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28. And this year, I promised myself I wouldn't be the family's fix-it person anymore. Then, at 1:12 a.m., I opened my phone and saw my name on the town festival website, listed as operations lead. No call, no text. Just decided. On my kitchen table sat the keys to my RV trip, the one thing I'd planned that was only mine. And in that moment, I realized if I stayed quiet, I wasn't just being helpful. I was being signed away. Growing up, I was always called the independent one in my family, the one who didn't need much, the one who figured things out on her own, the one everyone described as easy. And for a long time, I wore that like a compliment. In the Carter family, that label came with a quiet role. Every year, when Desert Heritage Week came around, there was an unspoken understanding. If something needed organizing, smoothing over, staying late, filling gaps, it would somehow land on me. Not because I volunteered, not because I had nothing else going on, but because I didn't complain. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room. I didn't call in a panic. I didn't make emergencies feel like emergencies. So people assumed I was available. The truth is, I wasn't free. I was just low maintenance. And in families like mine, low maintenance quickly turns into open access. My mom, Linda, loved things looking good. Not just good presentable. She cared deeply about how our family appeared to the town, organized, reliable, always stepping up. She never said, "Emily will handle it." She said things like, "We'll figure it out," already knowing who we meant. And she didn't do it to be cruel. She did it because she trusted me. At least, that's what she told herself. My brother Mark and my sister Olivia had their own lanes. Mark handled the visible win sponsors, handshakes, smiling for photos. Olivia loved the creative side decor, aesthetics, anything that showed up well on social media. They showed up on time, they did their part, and then they left. The messy parts, the coordination no one wanted to touch, the late-night calls, the last-minute fixes, the stress that never made it into pictures. That was me. Somehow, being dependable turned into being default. There's this moment that happens in a lot of families, and no one announces it out loud. It's when a child stops asking for help, stops crying loudly, stops making needs obvious. Adults look at that and say, "She's grown. She's strong. She can handle it." But what they often miss is why. A kid who learns to take care of themselves too early isn't always confident. Sometimes, they've just learned that asking doesn't change anything. When you grow up like that, you don't expect backup. You become efficient. You anticipate problems before anyone else notices them. And later, when everyone's grown, people look at you and think, "She's fine." So they lean. They lean because you don't wobble. They lean because you don't make noise. They lean because you don't push back. And over time, that leaning becomes structural. No one ever sat me down and said, "Emily, this is your responsibility." They didn't need to. I had already shown them I would catch whatever fell. That's how the label independent slowly changed shape. It stopped meaning capable. It started meaning convenient. I didn't notice it at first, because the system worked. Things ran smoothly. The family looked good. The town saw a united front. And when things work, no one questions who's carrying the weight. But the cost of being the easiest person in the room is that you become the one everyone uses to keep things easy. No one asked if I was tired. No one asked if I wanted a break. They just assumed I'd manage because I always had. And here's the part that's hard to admit: I helped build that expectation. Every time I said, "It's fine," Every time I fixed something quietly instead of pointing it out. Every time I chose harmony over honesty. I taught them who I was willing to be. So by the time my name showed up on that website, it didn't feel shocking to them. It felt logical. Of course, Emily would handle it. She always does. But what no one realized was that being the most independent didn't mean I needed less care. It meant I had learned how to survive without it. And there's a difference between choosing to carry something and being handed the weight because no one else wants to feel it. I wasn't the strongest person in my family. I was just the one who never dropped anything. Until now. The call came in on a Tuesday afternoon, right when I was finishing up work and trying to close my laptop without thinking about deadlines for once. I almost didn't answer, but when your mom's name shows up on your screen, you answer. You always do. Her voice was sweet. Too sweet. The kind of sweetness that comes with urgency tucked underneath. Hey, honey, she said. I just wanted to run something by you real quick. That phrase, real quick, should have been my warning. She talked about the festival like she always did. How important it was this year. How many people were coming. How much it meant to the town. How proud she was that our family was so involved. And then she said it. So I was thinking, she said lightly, maybe you could help me handle operations this year. Help. That was the word she used. Not lead, not manage, not be responsible for, just help. At first, I nodded along, even though she couldn't see me, because I knew what help meant in our house. Help meant checklists. Help meant coordinating vendors. Help meant being the point person when something went wrong, because something always went wrong. Help meant staying late, answering calls, fixing problems that no one else wanted to touch. It meant carrying the invisible parts so everyone else could shine. She kept talking, filling the silence before I could respond. It's nothing big, she said. Just keeping things moving, making sure everything stays on track. I looked around my kitchen while she spoke, at the half-packed bag by the door, at the map I had taped to the fridge with little notes marking places I wanted to stop, at the RV keys I'd left on the counter on purpose, so I wouldn't forget why I'd planned this trip in the first place. I cleared my throat. Mom, I said carefully, I actually had plans that week. I told you I was going to take a few days and head out of town, just to reset. There was a pause. Not a surprised pause. A recalculating one. Oh, she said. Right. I remember you mentioning that. Then, almost immediately. But you're flexible. Emily, there it was. You're strong, she added. You always land on your feet. I didn't say anything. And it's not like you have the same kind of obligations your brother and sister do. She continued. You know how busy they are. Kids, schedules, commitments. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The implication sat there, heavy and familiar. You can adjust. They can't. I tried again. It's not that I don't care. I said, I just really need this break. She sighed, softly, like I had disappointed her without meaning to. I know, sweetheart, she said. I just thought you'd understand. You're the one who always does. That's how it happens. Not with yelling, not with demands, with compliments that double as pressure. Strong, independent, flexible. Words that sound supportive but quietly corner you. Because once someone labels you that way, saying no feels like betraying the version of you they've already decided on. I noticed something then. She wasn't asking if I could do it. She was talking as if the decision had already been made. She started listing things, who I'd coordinate with, what timelines we'd need to watch, which parts she was worried about slipping through the cracks. Each sentence landed like another box added to a load I hadn't agreed to carry. I interrupted her. "Mom," I said, firmer this time. "Are you asking me, or are you telling me?" Another pause. "Well," she said slowly, "I just assumed you'd want to help. You always step up." There it was again. Assumed. That word hit harder than anything else she'd said. Because assumption is where choice disappears. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that shows up right before I give in, the one that says, "Just do it. It'll be easier than dealing with this." And for a moment, I almost did. That's the part people don't see. How close you come to erasing yourself again just to keep things smooth. But something about that call felt different. Maybe it was the way she framed it, like generosity. Maybe it was how quickly my plans became negotiable while everyone else's stayed sacred. Or maybe I was finally tired enough to notice the pattern. Because I realized something then. She wasn't giving me responsibility because I was capable. She was giving it to me because I was convenient. In our family, being the strong one didn't mean you were protected. It meant you were available. It meant your time was flexible, your needs were optional, your boundaries were suggestions. And the more you proved you could handle things, the more things you were handed. I didn't argue with her on that call. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just listened. And the longer she talked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a request. It was a job assignment wrapped in praise. By the time we hung up, my hands were shaking not from anger, but from recognition. This was the moment. The quiet one. The one where I either said yes again and taught everyone nothing, or finally admitted to myself that being labeled independent had cost me more than I ever realized. After that call, I sat with my phone in my hand longer than I should have. I didn't feel angry yet. I felt unsettled, like something had shifted, but I couldn't name it. So I did the thing I usually avoid. I opened the family group chat. At the top, my mom had already posted an update. Nothing dramatic, just a cheerful message about how excited she was for this year's festival and how we're all set on operations. I scrolled. The first reply was from my brother, Mark. "Perfect." He wrote, "That's a relief. I can finally focus on the sponsor meetings and not worry about logistics." Relief. That was the word he chose. Not thanks. Emily. Not, "Did you agree to this?" Just relief, like a problem had been solved. A few messages later, Olivia chimed in. She sent a string of celebration emojis, then followed it with, "Yay. That means I can really go all in on decor and photos this year. This is going to look amazing. Look amazing." I stared at the screen, waiting for someone to ask the obvious question. No one did. No one tagged me. No one checked in. No one said, "Hey, Emily, are you okay with this?" They were talking around me, not to me, like the decision had already happened somewhere else. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't a conversation. It was a confirmation. Everyone was moving forward based on the same assumption they'd always relied on, that I would quietly fall into place. As I kept scrolling, more messages came in. Timelines, expectations, little jokes about how Emily always has it handled. It was strange watching my role get filled in by other people's words, like I was reading a script I hadn't agreed to perform. What hit hardest wasn't the workload. It was the way they spoke with certainty. Mark had already reshaped his plans. Olivia had already claimed her spotlight. They were redistributing responsibilities as if the hard part had been safely locked down. By me? That's when I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't being asked to help. I was being used as insurance. As long as I was there, the family could look organized. As long as I stayed quiet, nothing would fall apart in public. As long as I absorbed the stress, no one else had to. And if something did go wrong, there would be a name to point to, a familiar one, mine. I went back and reread my mom's message. She never said Emily will do this. She said we're all set. That wording mattered, because when responsibility is vague, accountability disappears. Everyone benefits, and no one is clearly in charge except the person who always picks up the slack. I started mentally mapping it out. If schedules conflicted, who would fix it? If vendors were late, who would get the call? If something broke, who would stay behind to deal with it? Not Mark. He'd be with donors. Not Olivia. She'd be taking photos. Not my mom. She'd be managing impressions. It would land where it always landed, on the person who didn't make noise. And suddenly, this wasn't just about me feeling taken for granted. It was about fairness. Because when things go well, everyone shares the credit. But when things go wrong, someone carries the blame, and that someone had already been chosen, quietly, conveniently, without a vote. I thought about how often this happens in families. Decisions get made without ever being spoken directly to the person most affected. Not because people are malicious, but because the system has learned who will comply. And the person who taught them that was my mom. Not intentionally, not cruelly. But she was the one who translated family effort into individual obligation. She was the one who reassured everyone else by promising what wasn't hers to give. In that moment, I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. My siblings weren't conspiring. They were responding to what they'd been told. And what they'd been told was that I was a sure thing. I locked my phone and set it down, my heart pounding, because now I understood the real problem. This wasn't about how much work there was. It was about how easily my consent had been skipped. And once consent becomes optional, respect usually follows it out the door. Sitting there alone in my kitchen, I realized something that made my stomach drop. If I didn't interrupt this narrative now, if I let this version of events stand, then the story wouldn't be that I helped my family. The story would be that I agreed. And that would make everything that came next feel justified, even the parts that broke me. That's when the anger finally showed up. Not loud, not explosive, just steady. Because being dependable is one thing, being decided for is another. And for the first time, I wasn't upset about the work. I was upset that my life had already been rearranged by people who never stopped to ask if I was willing to carry it again. I didn't call Rachel right away. I paced my kitchen first, pretending I was busy, like that would calm me down. But the longer I waited, the louder the noise in my head got. So I called her. Rachel answered on the second ring, breathless, like she'd been moving around. She asked how I was, and I tried to give the short version. I failed. I told her about the website, about my name being posted, about the group chat, about how everyone sounded relieved, excited, settled. She didn't interrupt me once. When I finally stopped talking, there was a pause. Then she said, very calmly, Emily, they don't need you. I started to respond, out of habit, to explain, to defend my family. But she kept going. They don't need you to help, she said. They need you to stay quiet. That sentence hit me so hard I had to sit down. She explained it in a way no one in my family ever had. This isn't about the festival, she said. It's about the system. You're the soft landing. You're the person who absorbs the mess so everyone else can look functional. I laughed, but it came out wrong. I told her she was exaggerating. Rachel didn't take the bait. Think about it, she said. When something goes wrong, who fixes it? When plans fall apart, Who adjusts? When people get stressed? Who smooths it over? I didn't answer. She didn't need me to. You don't make noise. She continued. You don't demand credit. You don't storm out. So everyone feels safe leaning on you, not because you're the strongest, but because you're the least likely to push back. That part stung, because it was true. Then she asked the question that made my stomach drop. What happens? She said. If you don't patch the cracks this year, I pictured it immediately. Missed deadlines, confused schedules, people realizing they didn't actually know who was responsible for what. I imagined the chaos and then something worse, the blame. I told her that was exactly what I was afraid of. Being called selfish, being told I'd ruined something that mattered to everyone else. Rachel sighed. Emily, a tradition that only survives because one person keeps sacrificing themselves, isn't a tradition. She said, it's a setup. I went quiet again, because I could already hear my mom's voice in my head. How disappointed she'd sound. How she'd frame it as me choosing myself over family. Rachel knew that tone too. She's going to say you changed, Rachel said. She's going to say you used to be easier. Easier. That word again. And you know what Rachel added? You did change. You got tired of disappearing. That's when she said the thing that scared me the most. If you step back, she said, the truth comes out, and people who benefit from your silence hate that. I told her I didn't want to hurt anyone, that I wasn't trying to make a point, that I just wanted a break. Rachel softened her voice. I know, she said, but you're not hurting them by leaving. You're just stopping yourself from bleeding quietly. I stared out my window, watching the desert sky darken. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine the opposite of what I'd always done. What if I didn't show up early? What if I didn't fix the schedule? What if I wasn't there to translate everyone's stress into solutions? Who would step in? Or would no one? And if no one did? What would that say? Not about me, but about how everything had been built. Rachel didn't tell me what to do. She didn't say, cut them off, or teach them a lesson. She just asked one last question. If the only way this works, she said, is if you stay small and silent, is that really something worth protecting? After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. I realized something unsettling. I wasn't afraid of leaving. I was afraid of being seen as the problem once I stopped fixing everyone else's. But that fear came with a strange clarity, because traditions don't collapse when one person rests. They collapse when they were unfair to begin with. And for the first time, I wondered if I stepped away, who would finally be forced to step up? The day before the festival was supposed to be a simple run-through. Just a final check. That's what everyone kept saying. When I arrived at the farm that morning, it already felt wrong. Trucks were lining up at the wrong entrance. Someone was unloading equipment that was meant to arrive the next day. 2 vendors were arguing because they'd both been assigned the same space. People weren't panicking yet. They were just waiting for instructions, waiting for someone to tell them where to go. My mom, Linda, was in the middle of it all, phone pressed to her ear, pacing. She was nodding, saying yes, of course, into the call, while motioning angrily at a volunteer who clearly didn't know what she was being blamed for. Every few steps, she'd glance around like she was looking for something, or someone. Mark was nowhere near the chaos. He was set up near the main barn, laughing with a sponsor, adjusting his jacket for photos. Olivia was busy arranging decorations, stepping back every few minutes to take pictures, already posting updates about how beautiful everything looked. They were both working, just not where things were falling apart. I stood there, taking it all in, No one had asked me a single question yet. No one had said, "Emily, what should we do?" They didn't need to. They were waiting for me to step in. And that's when I made a decision. I didn't. I leaned against the fence and watched. Within minutes, the cracks widened. A delivery driver asked who was signing off on inventory. No one answered. A volunteer asked who was coordinating schedules for the evening run-through. People looked at each other. Someone shouted my name from across the field, then stopped mid-sentence, like they remembered too late that I hadn't actually agreed to be there in that role. What was strange wasn't how fast things unraveled. It was how confused everyone seemed about why. There were more than enough adults around, plenty of experience, plenty of opinions, but no ownership. Everyone assumed someone else was handling it. That's the part people don't talk about. When too many people share responsibility disappears. One person thinks, "Mom's got it." Another thinks, "Emily always handles this." Someone else thinks, "It's not my lane." And suddenly, no one is actually in charge. I watched my mom hang up one call and immediately dial another, her voice sharper now. "Who approved this?" She snapped. No one answered. Mark glanced over, clearly irritated, but didn't move. He was in the middle of something. Olivia frowned at the noise, then turned back to adjusting lights. She didn't want the mess in her frame, and for the first time, I saw the system exactly as it was. Not a family pulling together. A relay race where everyone had been trained to drop the baton at my feet. People like to say chaos happens because situations are complicated, but that's not true. Chaos happens when responsibility has been passed around so loosely that no one feels obligated to pick it up. It wasn't that the festival was impossible to manage. It was that managing it had become invisible labor. Labor that had always been absorbed quietly by the same person. Me. When I wasn't stepping in, no one quite knew how. A volunteer came up to me, hesitant. "Are you coordinating today?" she asked. I took a breath. "No," I said. "I'm not." Her face fell, not in anger, but in confusion. "Oh," she said. "Then who should I talk to?" That question echoed everywhere. Who decides who fixes this? Who's responsible? And suddenly, everyone realized something uncomfortable. They didn't know, because they'd never had to. They'd been protected from that knowledge. By me. My mom finally spotted me standing there. Relief flashed across her face, followed immediately by frustration. "Emily," she said sharply, waving me over. "Thank God you're here. Can you just—" I didn't move. "I'm not running operations," I said calmly. The words felt surreal coming out of my mouth. She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Things are getting messy." I looked around us. "They already are," I said. And that's when it clicked for her, not fully, but enough. The problem wasn't the festival. The problem was that without me quietly absorbing everything, the illusion of control vanished. This wasn't about too many tasks. It was about too many people assuming they didn't have to take charge. When one person has always been the safety net, everyone else gets sloppy. Not because they're bad people, but because the consequences never reach them. As the morning wore on, the tension thickened. Deadlines slipped. People started snapping at each other. Someone finally asked the question no one had wanted to ask before. Who's actually in charge here? And no one had a clean answer. Standing there, watching it all unfold, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not revenge, clarity. This was the truth made visible, not through arguments, not through tears, but through absence. Because when the person who always patches the cracks stops doing it, the structure doesn't collapse by accident. It collapses because it was never evenly built to begin with. And for the first time, everyone could see exactly where the weight had been landing all along. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't try to convince anyone I was right. I knew by then that explaining wouldn't change anything. So instead, I did something much smaller and much harder. I sent one message. It wasn't long. It wasn't emotional. It didn't list every reason I was tired. It said this: I didn't agree to run operations. My name was posted without my consent. I won't be taking on that role this year. That was it. Before anyone could respond, I took screenshots of the festival website. My name, the title, public, official, already decided. I attached those screenshots to the message. Then I added one more thing: my calendar. The dates blocked off months ago. Plans I had already committed to, not as an explanation, as a boundary. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I was stating a fact. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Missed calls, messages stacking up, typing bubbles appearing and disappearing. I didn't open any of them. I reached for the RV keys instead. They were cold in my hand, heavier than they should have been. As I walked toward the door, my mom finally caught up with me. "Emily," she said sharply, "we need to talk about this." Her voice wasn't panicked yet. It was controlled. Tight. "What's there to talk about?" I asked. Her face flushed. "You can't just back out like this," she said. "People are counting on you." That's when I realized something important. She wasn't upset because there was no one else to help. She was upset because the picture she'd built was cracking. The image, the story, the version of our family that looked effortless and capable. "You're putting me in a terrible position," she said. I nodded. "I know," I said, "and I've been in that position for years." She looked stunned. "You didn't say no," she replied. "You always step up." That was the moment. Not the shouting, not the chaos. That sentence. Because that's when I finally said the thing I'd swallowed my whole life. "Helping is a choice," I said quietly. "When it's expected before I even open my mouth. It's not help anymore. It's use." Her mouth opened, then closed. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to. I walked out. And for the first time, I let the consequences land where they belonged. That's the part no one prepares you for. We're taught that if we speak up, we should explain ourselves better. That if people don't understand, we just need to communicate more clearly. But families don't change because of words. They change because of consequences. You can cry. You can beg. You can explain yourself perfectly. But if the system still works the same, nothing shifts. This time, it didn't work. Because I didn't stay to fix it. When I left the farm, I could already feel the tension behind me. Phones ringing. People realizing plans didn't line up. Tasks without owners. I knew what was happening without seeing it. The safety net was gone. And suddenly, everyone had to look at the structure underneath. That's when it hit me. For years, my silence had been cushioning everyone else from reality. I wasn't just helping, I was hiding the imbalance. By always stepping in, I was protecting people from the cost of their own assumptions. And as long as I did that, there was no reason for anyone to change. That's why I didn't argue, because arguments turn into opinions, and opinions can be ignored, but evidence absence, consequences, those are harder to dismiss. When my phone finally stopped buzzing, I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel, heart pounding. I felt guilty. Of course I did. But underneath that guilt was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief, because for the first time, I wasn't being managed by someone else's expectations. I wasn't erasing myself to keep things smooth. I wasn't absorbing pressure that wasn't mine. I wasn't being the strong one. I was just being honest. And honesty, I learned, is disruptive to systems built on quiet sacrifice. Letting the truth speak doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough to stop lying with your behavior. I didn't leave to punish anyone. I left to stop punishing myself. And if the only way something works is when one person keeps disappearing, then maybe the problem was never the person who finally walked away. Maybe the problem was everything that depended on her silence in the first place. Once I left, things didn't fall apart quietly. They unraveled in real time. Schedules started colliding. 2 booths were assigned the same space. A guest speaker showed up early with no one there to receive them. Supplies that were supposed to be delivered that morning never arrived, because no one had confirmed the order. And the strangest part wasn't the chaos. It was the confusion. People kept asking the same question over and over. Who's in charge of this? At first, everyone assumed someone else knew the answer. Mark thought Mom was handling it. Mom thought operations were covered. Volunteers kept checking their phones, waiting for instructions that never came. By mid-afternoon, the cracks were impossible to ignore. That's when the frustration turned inward. I wasn't there to absorb it, so it had to land somewhere else. I later found out Mark had pulled my mom aside. "You said Emily agreed to this," he told her. "That's why we all planned around it." Olivia echoed it, louder. "If Emily wasn't doing operations, why did you tell everyone it was handled for the first time?" The question wasn't why is Emily like this? It was who actually made this call, and suddenly, the spotlight shifted. My mom tried to smooth it over the way she always did. She told people there had been a misunderstanding, that plans changed, that I'd decided to step away at the last minute. But that explanation didn't hold, because the website still had my name on it, because the timestamp showed it had been posted days earlier, because my message was still sitting in the group chat. Clear and unedited. I hadn't ghosted anyone. I hadn't disappeared without warning. I had said no, in writing. For once, there was evidence, and without me, there to soften it. The discomfort stayed sharp. People started snapping at each other instead of calling me. Tasks that used to quietly land on my shoulders now bounced around the group with no takers. Someone had to decide who would stay late. Someone had to handle the upset vendors. Someone had to explain delays to guests. And no one wanted that role. I was miles away by then, parked at a quiet desert campsite. My phone was silent. No frantic calls. No. "Can you just fix this real quick?" No emotional emergencies framed as favors. For the first time, the absence was complete, and I let it be. Not because I wanted them to struggle, but because I wanted the responsibility to land where it belonged. That's the part people misunderstand. Walking away isn't about revenge. It's about refusing to keep rescuing people from the consequences of their own assumptions. By that evening, the narrative shifted again. It wasn't Emily is selfish. It was we didn't plan this right. And that distinction mattered, because blame thrives in vagueness. But accountability needs specifics. Who approved what? Who promised whom? Who said yes without asking the person who would actually do the work? Those questions had answers now, and none of them pointed to me. I found out later that my mom spent most of that night scrambling, not just fixing logistics, but explaining to my siblings, explaining to volunteers, explaining to people who had trusted her word. For the first time, she had to carry the weight of a decision she'd made on someone else's behalf. And I wasn't there to lighten it. Sitting under the open sky, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not the kind that comes from everything going smoothly, but the kind that comes from finally being honest. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel proud. I felt done. Done cushioning, done translating, done being the buffer between other people's choices and their consequences. That weekend, the town didn't collapse. The festival still happened. It just happened differently. A little messier, a little more strained, a lot more honest. And that was the part no one could ignore anymore. Because once the person who always took the fall stops standing there, the system has nowhere else to hide. A few weeks after everything settled, my mom called me, not to argue, not to accuse, just tired. Her voice didn't have that sharp edge anymore. It sounded worn down, like someone who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and finally ran out of strength to pretend otherwise. We talked for a while about small things first, the weather, work, how busy everything had been, and then there was a pause, the kind where you can tell the real conversation is about to start. She said, quietly, "I need to admit something." She told me she had used me as the final checkpoint, the safety net, the person she could rely on to make sure everything looked smooth, organized, respectable. If you were involved, she said, I didn't have to worry. Not because I was the best, but because I wouldn't say no. Hearing it out loud didn't feel like a victory. It felt like confirmation. I told her I wasn't cutting her off. I wasn't disappearing. I wasn't trying to punish anyone, but I was changing the rules. From now on, if someone wanted me to take on a major role, they had to ask. The responsibilities had to be clear, and my name couldn't be attached to anything publicly or privately without my consent. No assumptions. No, we thought you'd be fine with it. No last-minute pressure disguised as family loyalty. She didn't argue, and that silence told me more than any apology could have. Here's something I wish someone had told me earlier. The people who endure the longest are often blamed the hardest, not because they're wrong, but because their endurance becomes part of the system. When you're the one who always absorbs the stress, people stop seeing the stress. They only notice when you stop absorbing it. That's why the first time you say no, it feels explosive. That's why boundaries get labeled as selfishness. That's why your change is treated like a betrayal instead of a correction. You didn't suddenly become difficult. You just stopped disappearing. And when you stop disappearing, everything that was leaning on you has to find its balance or fall. If you've ever been called selfish for choosing rest, if you've been told you changed the moment you asked for clarity, if keeping the peace always seemed to require you to shrink, I want you to hear this clearly. Being dependable does not mean being disposable. Being strong does not mean being silent. And loving your family does not require sacrificing your identity. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is let things be uncomfortable long enough for the truth to show itself. So I'll leave you with this. If you're always the one holding everything together so everyone else can feel calm, ask yourself who benefits from that calm and how much longer you're willing to pay for it with your own life.